in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh my God, are you joking?
You're joking. Really? Seriously, it's not a wine. What is it?
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from tomorrow,
the people decide.
as the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections, we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
With the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from tomorrow at midnight on GB News.
Good evening. It's 7 o'clock and this is Farage with me, Tom Harwood, this evening. Now, the Rwanda detentions are beginning. Today, the Home Office has released footage of the detention of illegal migrants earmarked for removal to Rwanda. Could the scheme be finally getting off the ground? We'll speak to the one and only Nigel Farage, live from the United States. And speaking of the United States, campus protests from coast to coast. Violent clashes have erupted within large pro-Palestinian demonstrations and occupations. Across multiple states, riot police have been called in as serious disorder worsens. We'll be live at one such protest. And Brexit border chaos, as this week's imposition of EU import border checks that Brexiteers did not want to implement has sent heads spinning. We speak to the CEO of the Fresh Produce Consortium, who believes that there was another way through this. All of that to come on the programme just after your news update with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Tom. Good evening. Our top stories. Tonight, the 14-year-old boy killed in a sword attack in north-east London yesterday has been named as Daniel Angerin. The Met Police says a 36-year-old man remains in custody on suspicion of the teenager's murder. Daniel was a pupil at Bancrofts. That's the same school in East London attended by Grace O'Malley Kumar, who was murdered in a knife attack in Nottingham last summer. 4 other people were injured during that attack. Police believe a piece of glass may have been used as a weapon during an incident at a school in Sheffield. A 17-year-old boy has been arrested for attempted murder after 3 people were hurt at the Burley Academy this morning. Police have praised the actions of school staff during the frightening ordeal. Scotland's SNP government has survived a confidence vote at the Scottish Parliament. The leader of Scottish Labour, Anas Sarwar, tabled the motion after a power-sharing deal between the SNP and the Greens collapsed. The motion was defeated by 70 votes to 58. Well, meanwhile, 2 MSPs thought to be considering running to replace Scotland's First Minister have held private talks. John Swinney and Kate Forbes met at Holyrood yesterday. Both have received support from senior members of their party after Humza Yousaf announced that he was stepping down. The meeting has been described as informal, with both politicians still weighing up whether or not they should run. The first migrants set to be deported to Rwanda have been detained, and they include both men and women. The Home Office says a series of operations took place across the country this week, with more due to be carried out. Officials won't confirm how many people have been detained or where they were taken into custody, but it comes ahead of the government's bid to get flights off the ground by July, after the Safety of Rwanda Act became law last week. Meanwhile, more than 1,700 small boat migrants have crossed the English Channel in just over a week, GB News can reveal, after several more boats were intercepted in UK waters today. A boatload of around 70 people was taken to Dover Harbour by lifeboat in the early hours of this morning. So far today, though, around 400 people have been taken to the Border Force Migrant Processing Centre. Official figures for yesterday reveal that 268 migrants arrived on 5 small boats. And finally, Vickers occupied the Labour Party headquarters earlier to protest against an oil field licence. 5 members of the Christian Climate Action Group took over the lobby of the building in central London. They then held a church service to protest against Labour's refusal to cancel the Rosebank oil field licence. 20 others protested outside. Police responded to the scene. Well, for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Tom.
Good evening, welcome to Farage. My name is Tom Harwood. Now, last night we learnt of the first migrant removal to Rwanda. All it took was a £3,000 bribe, free room and board for 5 years, and a voluntary agreement from the migrant concerned. Well, that first removal may have been conducted softly, but the less voluntary aspect of the Rwanda partnership is now also underway, in force, with the Home Office today releasing footage of some of the migrants earmarked for removal being bungled into immigration enforcement vans and detained. Well, might this be the Rwandan scheme finally getting off the ground? Or is there still a long way to go? Let's speak with Nigel Farage now, GB News presenter and honorary president of Reform UK, live from the United States. Nigel, looks very sunny where you are. I'm deeply jealous, but clearly what the Home Office has been doing today is, above everything else, a communications operation showing that they're getting tough.
Well, all of it is, isn't it? I mean, the news that we got last night, the Sun newspaper talking about this being an historic move with this migrant going to Rwanda. Just get a sense of perspective on this. This is somebody who illegally came to Britain, wasn't granted asylum, which is unusual of itself, and then given 3,000 quid of taxpayers' money to voluntarily board a plane to Rwanda, where he'll be able to live for 5 years without rent, and in a country where 3 grand goes a long way. And it's ludicrous to link that to the Rwanda plan that was set out by Boris Johnson 2 years ago. No, this government is in desperate trouble, dire trouble. You know, predictions of perhaps this coming general election, the worst results ever in their nearly 200 years of existence. And Sunak knows this issue of people illegally crossing our borders and being allowed to stay is driving voters, particularly the Red Wall, mad. So the fact that today they've started rounding up a few people illegally and detaining them, on the face of it, you have to give them credit for. I mean, several years too late, but on the face of it, let's give them credit. The problem is, I suspect, this is where the problems are just beginning. We will see all sorts of other people on that list simply disappear off into the community and be virtually impossible to find. And for those that we do have in detention and plan to take to Rwanda, that is when the lawyers and the judges will kick in. We are still signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights. We've incorporated it into British law via the Human Rights Act. And whatever the Rwanda Act says in terms of it taking supremacy over the Human Rights Act, I would tell you that when this comes to court, British judges will rule in favour of our international agreement. So it's all well and good sounding tough, but can you actually deliver? And Tom, I still really doubt it.
Nigel, what the government would say there is that the Rwanda bill disapplies multiple sections of the Human Rights Act. On the face of the bill, it says that they can't guarantee that this bill, now this act, I should say, meets ECHR obligations. And it demands that judges follow British law, which is, under our system, generally regarded as supreme, over any international obligation. Do you not think that's worth the paper it's written on?
No, I don't. I mean, it may well be that disapplying those sections of the Human Rights Act works in British law, but we are still a signatory to an international treaty via that court in Strasbourg, and I just don't see a Conservative Prime Minister overruling a judgment of that court. Do you know what? If he did, half of his own party would be in rebellion. Many, many Conservatives support us being part of that European Convention. Now, if he does it, it'll be very brave and bold, but I believe that an international treaty is what would take precedent, and I think our judges and ultimately our Supreme Court would rule that way. Look, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I'm sick to death of thousands every month of these young men, undocumented young males of fighting age coming into our country about whom we know nothing of their backgrounds and their histories. I hope he can solve it. I just don't believe, all the while we're part of that treaty, that it actually can happen. And really, you know, Brexit should have been about leaving this particular treaty as well. Sadly, it wasn't.
This morning we learnt of the tragic story behind the little girl who was trampled to death on one of those boats that was due to come across the channel. Her father had applied for asylum in multiple countries, 4 EU countries, being turned down time and time and time again before trying to come to the UK. I suppose many would argue that it's the most humanitarian thing to do, to say, to be clear, to stop the ambiguity, to say that actually this is the way to stop people coming across, people who think that EU countries that say no to their asylum application, that the United Kingdom would then say yes. Surely that seems to be the most perverse incentive in the world. It leads desperate people who have been refused by various EU countries to then try their luck in the UK.
Tom, look, this idea of desperate people, I don't doubt amongst some of those that are crossing the English Channel, there are some genuinely fleeing persecution. But the wholesale abuse of our generosity, people pretending they're under 18 when they're in their 30s, people claiming to convert to Christianity from Islam, which of course we know they're not actually doing, people claiming they're gay and therefore can't be sent back to the country that they claim to have originally come from. The whole thing is a complete and utter racket. And I'd remind people, since 2016, we have taken in 500,000 refugees. They've come from Hong Kong, they've come from Afghanistan, they've come from Ukraine and elsewhere. It's not as if we're not the most generous country out there, because we are. What we cannot allow is for human traffickers to put people in dinghies to cross the English Channel. 90% of them are male, 80% of them are very young males. This has got to stop. And the only way we're going to stop it is by not being part of that European Convention and by saying that nobody that comes via this route will ever be allowed to stay. That is what Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, did back in 2013, and within 2 weeks the boats stopped coming. That is the only way we're ever going to solve this, and I believe that right from the start.
There's a huge degree of truth there, that to some extent it's not whether or not 1 or 2 migrants go to Rwanda. It's not the fact of 1 plane leaving or 2 planes leaving. It's the scale and regularity and, frankly, almost certainty that those planes, that deportation scheme will work for anyone who crosses irregularly and illegally. Nigel Farage, Honorary President of Reform UK and, of course, GB News presenter, thank you very much for joining us live from Florida. I'll let you get back to your holiday now. Amazing. Well, let's get more on this now with Omar Hamoud Gallego, the Political Science and Public Policy Fellow at the LSE, of course a former advisor to the United Nations as well. Let's get to the root of this. Frankly, the United Kingdom needs a way needs somewhere to deport people to who come here illegally, because some people can't be returned to their country of origin. This is where we get the safe third countries, such as Rwanda, coming into the whole scheme. Stripped back to that very basic level, it's a scheme that makes sense.
Okay, let me make it clear to start with. The Rwanda plan and the voluntary deportation scheme that's been on the news today are scams that the British taxpayer is paying for. It's a system that it's a plan that is inefficient because it will not work, it will not deter anyone, it will simply shift the mode of entry of many of these asylum seekers. It's extremely expensive because it will cost over £500 million for only the first 300 people, and it's likely illegal. It goes against the Geneva Convention and the European Convention of Human Rights that was mentioned earlier. So none of this is going to work. What a government that is serious about this should do instead is get a deal with our European neighbours, and this government is clearly not interested in doing this. A government that is serious will introduce resettlement routes, such as the Ukrainian program that was introduced when the war started, such as the program for people from Hong Kong, and would also allow asylum seekers to work as soon as they come here. But this sort of idea that threatening people to send them to Rwanda will change will suddenly change their destination country is a bit far-fetched. What has been happening now with Ireland shows to you how this is going to happen, because instead of a few people, not many people, but instead of just not coming to the UK, what they've done is that they've come to the UK, they moved to Ireland, they can apply for asylum there, and then they can spend the rest of the time in the UK. Because there's freedom of movement.
Well, of course, the Irish government is saying that the people are staying in Ireland. The Irish government is having a torrid time of it. It expected 4 times higher per person migration into Ireland than the United Kingdom this year. According to the Irish government, at least, that's the Rwanda scheme working.
No, absolutely. It's the other way around. It's the migrants having found a way, asylum seekers having found a way around the Rwanda scheme. Because instead of applying for asylum in the UK, you apply for asylum in Ireland, you wait until you are recognised as a refugee, and then you can freely move within the UK.
Now, a lot of people will be asking, why on earth are people that are turned down time and time again in EU countries then trying to get across to the UK? Why is our system so much more lax on the face of it than many European countries?
I would disagree with this. I don't think it's much more easier to come here, and the rules are actually much stricter, right? So, for instance, just to give you an idea, I'll just give you an idea.
Percentages are sometimes in the 90% range.
For some groups,
in European countries, they're often in the 20% range.
Depends for the countries we're discussing about, right? But let me make it clear, for instance, one main difference. If you apply for asylum in most European countries, you will be able to work roughly 3 to 6 months after you've basically made your application. In the UK, you have to wait a whole year, and still people decide to come here. Why is it the case? It's because migration decisions are very much more based on social networks and language rather than...
Do we really believe that the people currently coming to the United Kingdom, waiting a year, 2 years even for their assessment, do we really believe that they're not working? Are they not going into the grey economy, the black economy, an incredibly easy way to abscond into that sort of system?
Absolutely. This is why the system is totally flawed, and why there is a big campaign, and I'm in favour of that campaign, to allow asylum seekers to work as soon as their application is deemed admissible. Because otherwise, what they're doing is that they're just working in the grey economy, maybe falling into the hands of criminal groups. So the only people who are effectively benefiting from this are the criminal groups that eventually employ people without contracts.
Now, lots of people said that the government would never get a single plane off the ground to Rwanda. Are you one of those people? Were you ever one of those people? Or do you now see that there is a high degree of potential that within a matter of weeks we will start to see what the Prime Minister described as a regular rhythm of those flights?
I don't think there will be a regular rhythm of flights at any point in time. There might be one symbolic flight because the government seems very determined to do this. But over the long term, I think the courts will say this is a scheme that infringes upon the human rights of these individuals. And if, let's say, leaving the European Convention of Human Rights is a strategy to get around this, I think this is a terrible idea, because the European Convention of Human Rights has very little to do with migration per se. and is instead a convention that actually guarantees the human rights of every single British citizen and resident, right?
But what do you mean by those human rights? Because we can point to examples of the ECHR doing what many people, many reasonable centre-ground people in the United Kingdom would say is massive overreach. Take the case in Switzerland just a few weeks ago. The Swiss people voted in a referendum that they did not want to go further and faster on their net zero plans.
Absolutely.
And then a group of elderly women take the government to the ECHR and claiming it breaches their women's rights because they get overexposed to heat. And suddenly you have a court, an international court, saying the government cannot pursue the policy that the people have voted for and must instead pursue a policy that is decreed to be more in favour of women's human rights.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me make one thing clear. What the judgment about Switzerland, what it was about and what the ECHR decided was that effectively the Swiss government had to have a plan to deal with climate change, but it doesn't say what it should do, right? So it's just about the rules.
You can see how people think that this is not what Churchill envisaged when this was drawn up. This was about limiting state power, making sure that we did not have another fascist government in any European country. Instead, it's doing the opposite now. It's projecting state power. Instead of saying the state should do less, this is a court saying the state must do more.
Look, if there are certain disagreements about decisions of the ECHR, we, being part of it, we can reform it. And this has been done several times over the years, thanks to British input.
In that Swiss judgment, there was one dissenting judge.
Yes.
And that was the British judge. Every other judge from various European countries all said that this madcap climate policy must be given down from the court to the government.
Look, even if we disagree with a single judgment, that doesn't mean that the whole court should be thrown out of the way, right?
Doesn't it indicate the direction of a court?
No, absolutely, because there are specific decisions that it has taken that have upheld human rights and have made sure, for instance, let me give you an example. One of the main rights that the Convention is a fairly short document, right? And one of the main rights that it upholds and discusses is the right to a fair trial and to a life free of torture, right? So let's put the case, let's imagine, hypothesize. At some point in the future, a government could come to the UK that might decide that torture and not having a fair trial could be an option that they want to implement. Then, if the courts are stopped through legislation such as the Safety of Rwanda Bill, then the only court that would ensure that British citizens are free of torture, that they can have a free trial, even if a person like you or myself find ourselves in a situation where we are attacked by, let's say, politicized courts, that court will defend our rights. And that's part of what being a democracy means, right? Having independent, strong institutions, even non-elected.
I'm sure we could all point to certain rights that we thought were good and noble and true, but I think everyone can point to rights that seem to have grown beyond their original intentions in that court. So I'm afraid we've run to the end of the conversation, but Omar Hamoud Gallego, thank you so much for joining us and talking through those issues. Now, next we're going to be live back in the United States, different part of the United States, with our US correspondent Stephen Edgington. He'll be at one of these encampments of students at a university in Washington, D.C. Things are getting serious. That after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The biggest of occasions for England's smallest county. In Rutland, there isn't a single statue. Now there shall be, of one of the most important people in British history, the late Queen. Lord Lieutenant Sarah Furness represents the monarch in the county.
Her Majesty provided us all with a sense of stability and continuity. As head of state, she gave us national identity.
Raising £140,000 in donations, mostly from individuals, the statue in the town of Oakham is the first of its kind to be unveiled since the death of Queen Elizabeth. Howell Pratley is the sculptor.
I am a big fan of public sculpture, being integral to, a friendly, caring community.
Young and old are lining the streets to catch a glimpse of the 7-foot statue. including 89-year-old Joyce Lucas in the front row.
We met her on several occasions in Oakham, and we've got some lovely photographs and lovely, lovely memories. She is the Queen. She was great. She was brilliant, and we miss her.
The Queen's death broke the nation's heart. Her memorial is filling Rutland with pride. Her image, taken from early middle age, set in bronze.
It's a real fitting tribute to the late Queen.
I think it captures our late Majesty's humanity, but also she looks so regal.
Absolutely beautiful.
Queen Elizabeth was Britain's longest reigning monarch. Her reign was great, unlikely to be matched by future king or queen. A legacy of unwavering service recorded in a place of permanent remembrance. Will Hollis, GB News in Oakham.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 24 minutes past 7. You're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, from sea to shining sea of the United States of America, student protests have erupted this week. Notably, in UCLA on the West Coast, riot police were sent in, whilst this morning in New York, Mayor Eric Adams announced hundreds of arrests and declared outside agitators were radicalising students at Columbia University in Manhattan. Well, our very own Stephen Edgington, GB News US correspondent, is at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where there are yet further protests. Stephen, what's the scene on the ground?
Well, I'm here, as you say, at George Washington University, named after the great founder of the United States. And behind me there is a statue of George Washington, which has been completely vandalised with the words, "was a warmonger," and even has an Arabic headdress on. These protests have swept across the United States. We haven't seen these kind of protests since 2020 with the BLM riots. In New York, as you mentioned, there have been over 300 arrests. Yesterday, last night, there was violence on the other side of America in California, the University of California. And I'm actually here, as you say, at George Washington University, and we tried to speak with some protesters. We wanted to speak with some of the pro-Palestine people. No one, unfortunately, wants to speak to us. We asked many, many people. However, we did find one person, Alvin. He is a student at George Washington University, and I wanted to get your perspective, Alvin. Yeah, sure. So, what do you think about these protests?
Yeah, so I'm firmly opposed to these protests. As a matter of principle, I totally support free speech and protest. It is the bedrock of our democracy, our republic. But it is not free speech when you start, blocking the streets, occupy university grounds when the school has been very clear that this is a violation of campus policy. Sure, you have the right to protest, but I also have the right to attend classes freely without you obstructing me. And so these students, they've totally occupied university grounds. They've blocked the streets for as far as I can remember. This is illegal. This is in violation of school policy.
Is George Washington a warmonger?
Of course not. That's nonsense. It makes no sense whatsoever. But I think it speaks to a broader point about these protests, which is that it seems more of like an intersectional exercise of ideology. Many of these kids here, I don't think they're actually here because they care about Palestine. I think they're here because they think they're doing something good. They're causing some positive change in the world, frankly.
What do you think of their calls for revolution?
Yeah, it's quite disturbing, frankly. It's like, I'm all in support of free speech and free expression, but when you start chanting from the river to the sea, which is essentially calling for the state of Israel to be wiped off the map, when you start calling for intifada revolution, harkening back to the the movement in Gaza in the late 1980s, that is very disturbing. Some of these calls, I think, are calling for genocide, frankly. And the fact that the administration, doesn't seem to be interested in condemning this stuff, I think shows complicity on their part, frankly.
Thank you so much, Alvin. Really appreciate your time there.
Thank you.
Stephen, it seems that on one level, this is something that is spreading from university to university. In your knowledge, is there a single university in the United States that currently doesn't have some form of occupation?
It seems to be a phenomenon that spreads, as you say, to universities across the country, not only in the west and east coast. You've also got the University of Michigan and many institutions. I think wherever you have young left-wing students who are looking to potentially virtue signal or incredibly angry about events in Israel and Palestine, you are going to see these protests spread. And unfortunately, we saw violence last night in California. Obviously, this hasn't happened here yet in George Washington University, but actually, interestingly enough, very soon there are going to be some some Congress people coming to George Washington from the Republican Party, actually literally just down the road from where we're standing, and they're going to be coming and talking to some of these protesters, and it'll be interesting to see the reaction from some of these people here today.
It certainly will, because it does seem that there have been cases whereby it's hard to explain, but it seems that some of these protesters are almost cosplaying, pretending to be the sort of radical protesters that you might have seen in Paris in the 1960s. There are those that occupy buildings in New York and then demand that their various university officials bring them food or water, claiming that their human rights are being breached, forgetting that they're the ones that are occupying a university building. It boggles the mind.
It certainly is causing major disruption to students, many of whom have paid thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for their tuition, and they simply want to get into their universities and learn and complete their degrees. Unfortunately, some of their peers and colleagues believe it's more important to protest events thousands of miles away. A foreign war in the Middle East has taken over American student domestic politics, and it's so interesting as well to see the kind of merging of both the left-wing protesters, the young left-wing people, but also the recent immigrants from the Middle East, particularly from Muslim countries, who have kind of united in their hatred of Israel, in their discussions around calling for a revolution. There's some really extreme language that we've heard here today, actually, from some of the protesters, and I know that many Americans will be concerned about what's going on across the country.
No, certainly. Very, very true. Stephen Edgington, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Now, I have to say, as a Brit, seeing so many American students correctly determine that George Washington was indeed a warmongerer, a traitor to the crown, perhaps this is, after all, a protest calling for the United States, or those states that became the United States, to return properly to the British crown. Perhaps that's just me being optimistic there. I don't think that's necessarily what they were thinking. But coming up next, we're going to be talking about Brexit, because border checks have been introduced this week for the first time on food imports to the United Kingdom. Why have we done this? The former business secretary decided to kick these checks into the long grass, and was there a better way to go? Well, we'll be discussing that after this.
Hi there, welcome to the latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Heavy rain overnight in the south, continuing into much of Thursday. Risk of thunderstorms in places, but it will be much drier further north. We've got an area of low pressure across the continent. That's going to push some humid and warm air into much of the UK overnight, but on the boundary between that and the cooler air out in the Atlantic, we've got this reactivation of a frontal zone bringing some heavy rain to Northern Ireland, Wales, and then increasingly southern England. The persistent wet weather will affect South Wales and the southwest of England by dawn, but thundery showers will turn up across the Midlands, southern England as well, and they'll tend to drift their way northwards and westwards into mid-Wales and and continue for some time through the morning. Eventually, the rain does ease in many places. We keep the cloud cover in the south, but much drier and brighter weather is expected further north. I think for northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, some decent sunny spells will turn up. However, on the North Sea coast, a lot of low cloud will be prevalent, and that will limit temperatures 11 to 12 Celsius, whilst it goes up to 21 to 23 Celsius in western Scotland. Similar temperature contrast across northern Scotland. On Friday, warm in the west, cool in the east. Southern England, some warm sunshine as well, but in between, outbreaks of rain continuing, even some thundery showers. On Saturday, the fine weather moves north, but there'll be further rain coming up from the south.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs Live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 7:34 and you're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, after no less than 5 consecutive delays, Brexit border checks on EU fresh food imports were imposed this week. As Business Secretary, GB News' very own Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Business Secretary, I should say, as Business Secretary, he kept kicking the idea of checks into the long grass, arguing why rush to impose checks on imports from a more regulated economy? Well, with Jacob gone, his successors have clearly relented. But was there another way through this? I'm delighted to be joined now by Nigel Jenny, the CEO of the Fresh Produce Consortium. Nigel, a lot of people will be scratching their heads at this, thinking the United Kingdom is seeing itself perhaps as moving away from an EU regulatory model, that is much tighter, much more regulated. Why on earth are we rushing so quickly to impose checks on imports from the EU?
Good evening, Tom. Yes, your point is well made. I have to say the UK government has procrastinated for years to decide what the correct border strategy is. It's single-handedly implemented the new border strategy of the last few days without, frankly, my members' support or my industry's support. And we feel this is a highly complex, highly expensive and totally avoidable solution. There are much more efficient and effective solutions that wouldn't have cost the industry, frankly, a small fortune, and ultimately UK consumers. And I think what we have to remember is this is the sole responsibility of the UK government. They have decided this process. They have, I hope, although I doubt perhaps, understood the huge costs and disruption it will have on industry and ultimately we as all as UK consumers.
The previous government, led by first Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss, seemed to have a policy of sort of kicking the can down the road, saying that nothing will be implemented until all the tech is up and running, until what they describe as something called the single trade window is fully implemented. This government, however, seems to have jumped ahead, stopped delaying things, and perhaps delay actually wasn't so bad a word in the case of all of these things, and has implemented these checks pretty abruptly. this week. What do you think they should have done instead?
Well, I think the single trade windows you mentioned could be a very valuable tool, but it's years away. So they have implemented the decision, which I have to say they did announce some time ago. However, a huge amount of the detail that the industry needs has only been announced in the last few weeks, which has caused total chaos. And the fees that they are saying they will apply to the industry are simply enormous. So from our point of view, we have for years offered alternative solutions. They frankly have been ignored. They could be put in place retrospectively, and I hope the government seriously considers what we've previously proposed, because as we speak, we're in a situation, as I understand it, as I came to this meeting a few minutes ago, the IT system managing the border has just failed. I can't confirm that, but I understand that is the case, but I may be wrong there. But beyond that...
Nigel, I would be shocked. A government IT system not working? Colour me shocked.
Well, you know, none of us are surprised, let's put it that way. And at the same time, we're in a situation of, look, we have proactively as an industry offered alternatives. And let me just put that in context, is that as an industry, we've accepted things are changing, and we have proactively put facilities in place at our members' facilities to allow government officials to conduct inspections as and when they see fit. That is by far the most efficient and least cost way of having a border at a level, let's put it that way. However,
so sort of random spot checks rather than sort of a process now where almost everything has to go through the same checking system.
Well, it goes through the same IT system, but the physical checks is where the issue is. On the solution that we offered, there would be a cost to industry to have an official inspector, and the goods would need to be presented for inspection. But that was
Nigel, why
cost.
do you think the government isn't listening to you?
Because I think they are fixated with their own model, because they've invested huge amounts of time and, frankly, taxpayers' money. And if I briefly explain the income that will generate that from fees, some may say it's a thinly veiled tax, another thinly veiled tax on business and consumers. So our suggestion is use the alternative government industry facilities. However, literally before this went live, we were told by officials that they wouldn't inspect consignments at these facilities beyond 7 o'clock in the evening. And my industry imports highly perishable goods. They'll arrive from Europe through the evening and through the night. So that's not an option. So we want urgently those inspections to be put in place to minimise cost to industry and disruption to both consumers and cost to consumers. And if I put in context the government's solution of using Shevington, if I present a consignment at one of my members' facilities, that will cost around £100, but the inspectors are not being made available in the evening and through the night. If I present my consignment at Shevington, the same equivalent cost at levels of inspection is almost £5,000. That is the difference.
I can easily see why you and your members are calling this a tax on business. It seems like that is a remarkable markup. Doing it yourselves, £100, getting the government to do it, £5,000. What a remarkable situation. It does seem that talking to people previously in government, the civil service have been pushing this option, whereas previous ministers tried to find other ways of doing it. Nigel Jenny, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. CEO of the Fresh Produce Consortium, really appreciate your time on this issue, an important issue. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking about what the Farage, because earlier today in the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, this took place. Have a watch.
We need to wait for the First Minister to come, because obviously the debate is on the First Minister. Or is it another minister's response?
Responding to the debate.
Oh, right. That is disappointing, that is. OK, the First Minister hasn't come to a debate about, obviously, the conduct related to the Ministerial Code, which, on the state of ministerial responsibilities, he is responsible for the Ministerial Code. So I think that's disappointing, to say the least, that he hasn't turned up to this afternoon's debate.
What a remarkable turn of events. A debate in the Welsh Parliament, in the Senedd, on the conduct of the Welsh First Minister. This, of course, relating to the two £100,000 donations that he received from a criminal during his leadership campaign, a campaign which ended with him becoming the First Minister of Wales. Well, taking this money from this convicted criminal, and indeed in recent days as it's become to light, as we discussed on this programme yesterday evening, the £400,000 loan that the Welsh Government gave to that company only a few years ago, you start to see how the questions become larger and larger. And then you add to this whole cocktail of sludge that this very company that donated all of that money is seeking permissions from Vaughan Gething's Welsh Government. See how it all looks like it begins to tie together. A crucial question to debate, but today the First Minister of Wales refused to show up in the Welsh Parliament for that debate. Well, we on this programme reached out to Vaughan Gething, the First Minister of Wales, or any representative for a comment on the extraordinary scenes that we saw this afternoon in the Welsh Parliament. Sadly, they haven't got back to us. I wonder why. Well, coming up, we're going to be talking about the ambulance crisis in the United Kingdom. What on earth is going on with the speed of our care? That next.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from tomorrow,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from tomorrow at midnight on GB News.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I have to say, the jam issue is
It's all very WI, isn't it?
Well, it's ridiculous. Now there's a picture of a friend of hers who's lying on the grass, cuddling a bowl in which the jam is placed in the middle with lemons around it, and a dog lying next to her. So she's holding this as if it's someone else that she really loves. I think, well, Meghan would have organised that because she'd have given her the present. I think this is too far. I mean, it's jam.
It's stupid as well.
Yes.
I mean, you know, if any of us were to bring out a product, you know, Isabel, I might associate with jam. No, you know, I could see, you know, could see how that would
Sticky
work.
jam.
Yeah, but Meghan Markle, no, why?
Well, what was her website called? Twiggy or Tiggy?
No,
or
I've got it down because I can't remember. America. Oh, Tig, the Tig.
Tig. She used to be quite, you know, a lifestyle guru pre-Harry. So she's trying to go back to look at what I'm wearing, look at what I'm eating. I can get everybody to buy my product.
And what the chickens should have in my garden.
Do you actually think jam crosses her lips? Would
no,
you?
of course, way too much sugar
but
in
they
there.
also say it comes from her garden. I mean, how many strawberries has she got? Does it mean 50 people, that's only enough for them? It's not going to have thousands of people asking for jam. We won't have it. And there is a thing that she was cross that, well, she said, jealousy, really, that King Charles brings in all the food and the jam things to make from somewhere else. He doesn't do it himself or get his staff to do it. But he gives it all the money to charity, right?
Yes.
All this money is for Meghan. And it's sold out. And people have thought, well, actually, if we are going to get jam, if that's what's trendy, let's get it from the king, not from Meghan.
Not her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 47 minutes past 7 and you're watching Farage with me, Tom Harwood. Now, the schoolboy killed in yesterday's London sword attack has been named as 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin. He was struck by a sword as he walked to school. By a remarkable and tragic coincidence, the very same school attended by Grace O'Malley Kumar, who was killed, of course, in the vicious Nottingham knife attacks last year. 2 further stabbings have taken place at schools in the last fortnight too, in Sheffield and in South West Wales. What on earth is going on with the safety of not only everyone in the United Kingdom, but particularly children and teenagers? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Alison Cope, an anti-knife crime campaigner whose own teenage son was tragically killed in a knife attack. Alison, it seems that this is an issue that is simply spiralling out of control.
Yeah, good evening. It's been spiralling out of control for quite a while now. And we have the same conversations. We have these horrific headlines, and yet we're still not getting a grip of it. And I don't know how many more young people have to be injured or killed in this country for it to become a priority. It just doesn't seem that children matter as much as other things do in this country, unfortunately.
I know that you go into schools, you talk to young offenders as well. What do you tell those who are perhaps most at risk in getting involved in this world? What do you tell them about your son?
I just try and be as honest as I can, but a lot of my work at the moment is focused on the online issues that every young person in this country faces, which is why we're finding it so difficult to pinpoint a cause, really grab hold of it and resolve it, because we've got young people arranging fights outside schools, running towards fights, taking weapons out of fear. There is so many issues, and all we're doing is having a brief conversation about it and then moving on to the next topic. And I wish government would take a step back and really invest their time and effort at having a look at how to address the next few years to something that actually is successful, because it's getting absolutely ridiculous at this point.
What does that solution look like? Because the government often talks about how it's banning this kind of knife or that kind of knife, trying to make the availability of these weapons ever harder. But I suppose you can't ban your way out of a crisis like this. This is something that's got to come through culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think mindset, you can't ban mindset. You can certainly influence mindset, though. For example, in the West Midlands, the #1 murder weapon is the kitchen knife. So banning zombie knives, banning swords is obviously very, very important. Making them harder to have access to is obviously important. But the mindset is absolutely destroyed in this country. So for me, the only real way we're going to start to get a grip of all the young people's mindsets is through compulsory education. We all bang about the importance of education. The government's had every bit of research, every bit of information they need to say this is where we need to really focus, and yet it hasn't been made compulsory in education. We've got millions of young people in this country who are being influenced by what's on social media, and we've sold them a dream, and unfortunately it is now backfiring.
So what does that education look like? What should be being said in schools beyond just that using knives are bad, carrying knives is bad? Is there some sort of magic formula here?
There's not a magic formula, but I think we need to change the formula that those in power seem to think is successful, which obviously isn't. For me, it's not about saying to a young person, don't do this, don't do that. Where historically has that ever worked? It's about really showing a young person the implications of picking up that weapon, the implications of getting involved with drama, representing yourself negatively online, and where it can actually lead to, and making young people realise that if there's 10 million views on videos saying it's okay, but then we're saying it's not, it's making sure that our message is stronger than the message that some young people are receiving at the moment. And that's where the whole debate about youth centres, youth workers, support for schools comes in. But the government, for some reason, can't seem to prioritise the money for that because they're prioritising other things.
It does seem that there is a particular problem in London more than any other part of the country. I know you have a specialism within the West Midlands, but in London we've seen an over 20% rise in knife attacks in the last year, compared to very little rise in other parts of the country. What do you think it is about London specifically?
I mean, for me personally, I think the problem is everywhere, which is a shocking thing to say. We always focus on London. And the issue I have with that is that there will be people in other parts of the country thinking, oh, well, that's okay. I don't need to have the conversation with my child now because London is the only issue, when in fact, we've got issues everywhere. You know, every single city is seeing a number of stabbings per day. So I think, you know, if you have a look at certain areas, every area is different. London is absolutely overflowing with, you know, people. It's a very busy place, you know, very congested. So you're always going to get a higher percentage of crime, knife crime, whatever it is, because you've got a huge amount of people in one area. But we're seeing stabbings. There isn't a single city that I deliver in, and I actually deliver across the UK now, where I haven't been to a single school where they haven't had an incident, they haven't had a weapon carried, they haven't had a prearranged fight that's led to an injury. Not one school that I've been to has said everything's okay here. Everybody's struggling, and we really need to prioritise it now. Not just
Alison, you speak incredibly powerfully there. And thank you for sharing what you do and your story. Alison Cope there, anti-knife crime campaigner whose son Joshua was tragically killed in a knife attack. But coming up next here on the station is State of the Nation with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, what's coming up?
Well, we're going to be talking about this extraordinarily nasty attack on Kate Forbes by a columnist called Kenny Farquharson in The Times. He basically wants to purge Christians from public life and says because she's a Christian, she shouldn't be the leader. It's a really vicious piece, and it's extraordinary how hypocritical the left are, that they boast about not wanting hate speech and then they write these most hateful pieces.
Interesting how you often get these pieces about Christians, but not about any other religion.
Well, that's part of the point, that he says how good Hamza Yusuf was and how wonderful it was to have a Muslim. But Muslims believe very much the same thing as a lot of Christians about some of the issues he raises, yet that's good. But if it's a Christian, she should be rooted out of public office.
Remarkable cognitive dissonance there, but that's all coming up on Jacob Rees-Mogg, State of the Nation next. But first, though, it's the weather with Aidan McGivern.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Heavy rain overnight in the south, continuing into much of Thursday. Risk of thunderstorms in places, but it will be much drier further north. We've got an area of low pressure across the continent. That's going to push some humid and warm air into much of the UK overnight, but on the boundary between that and the cooler air out in the Atlantic, we've got this reactivation of a frontal zone bringing some heavy rain to Northern Ireland, Wales, and then increasingly southern England. The persistent wet weather will affect South Wales and the southwest of England by dawn, but thundery showers will turn up across the Midlands, southern England as well, and they'll tend to drift their way northwards and westwards into mid-Wales and continue for some time through the morning. Eventually the rain does ease in many places. We keep the cloud cover in the south, but much drier and brighter weather is expected further north. I think for northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, some decent sunny spells will turn up. However, on the North Sea coast, a lot of low cloud will be prevalent, and that will limit temperatures 11 to 12 Celsius, whilst it goes up to 21 to 23 Celsius in western Scotland. Similar temperature contrast across northern Scotland. On Friday, warm in the west, cool in the east. Southern England, some warm sunshine as well, but in between, outbreaks of rain continuing, even some thundery showers. On Saturday, the fine weather moves north, but there'll be further rain coming up from the south.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We've blown the budget by giving you the chance to win a totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you